Suddenly, Alexander was heir apparent. But this was not a good thing. Life as a Russian prince shouldn't have been so bad, but Alexander's childhood was a nightmare. His father, Tsar Nicholas, had always been a strict stick in the mud, but once he took to the throne, it got much worse. For years, the emperor kept an iron grip on his son, as well as his country. It was no coincidence then that Alexander rebelled in a big way. As he grew up, he became the total opposite of his father, a liberal and a libertine. By the time he turned 21, Alexander's parents were desperate to get him to settle down, and they had just the idea. In 1839, Alexander embarked on a journey that would change his life. At the time, young men often went on a grand tour of Europe, and his parents arranged for him to do the same. Except it came with a twist. The Tsar and Tsarina expected their heir to meet his future wife on the trip, and even had a whole list of ladies and stops picked out for him. In classic Alexander style, he completely upended their expectations. During one stop, Alexander met the young Queen Victoria, who was unmarried at the time and just a year younger than him. However, Victoria was explicitly not part of his bride list. The pair of them were too powerful together, and any union between them would make other countries mighty nervous. So, of course, Alexander had to go and push his limits. Although nearly lost to history, Alexander's visit to Queen Victoria contained an enormous secret. Victoria's future marriage to Prince Albert may now be famous, but she and Alexander likely entertained a dalliance on this trip all the same. Though the romance was brief and unconsummated, Alexander no doubt loved flexing his forbidden love muscles, and he didn't stop creating scandal. The family favorite bride on Alexander's bachelor tour was Princess Alexandrine of Baden, the rather homely-looking but eminently respectable daughter of a German duke and a Swedish princess. In fact, everyone thought that she was such a shoo-in that Princess Alexandrine herself felt that she was already betrothed to Alexander and acted accordingly. But boy, did he disappoint her. On his way over to Baden, Alexander's entourage grew tired of the constant city-hopping and princess shopping, and begged him to stop in the German city of Darmstadt. At first, Alexander resisted. He wasn't tired at all. Besides, he knew that Louis II, the reigning duke, and thus the man he'd have to stay with, had a raging case of doldrums. In other words, no fun, no Alexander. Eventually, his men convinced him to calm the heck down and grow the heck up, and he stopped in Darmstadt after all. It was a date with destiny. Though the pleasure-seeking Alexander feared a dull evening with the much older Louis, his fretting stopped the moment that the Duke's young and pretty daughter, Princess Marie, entered the room, slim, tall, and much prettier than his supposed betrothed, Princess Alexandrine. The girl gave young Alexander immediate heart palpitations, except he should have thought twice. Even by Alexander's own admission, he was into Mary, quote, at first sight, quote, which is actually a little creepy. See, Marie was only 14 years old at the time, so young that she still wore her hair loose the way children did. She was also equally inexperienced in society. Creepy age and maturity difference aside, Alexander was clearly all in and stayed to dine, even though he did indeed find Marie's father dull. Like everything he did, Alexander worked fast. When he left Marie, his flirtation had progressed enough for her to gift him a locket with her hair inside, only it was all about to come crashing down. After his meeting with Marie, Alexander wrote to his father and mother, passionately declaring his love. His parents' response shocked him. Sure, he was supposed to sample an array of potential brides, but he was also supposed to marry poor Princess Alexandrine in the end. His mother protested vehemently, citing how inferior Marie's family was to their own. Faced with this opposition, there was only one thing Alexander could do. Already impulsive and uber-romantic, two traits that would not serve him well in the future, Alexander scrawled off a series of hastily written letters to his parents. In them, he gave a stunning ultimatum. Using the only power that he had, he threatened that he would simply drop out of the line of succession if they didn't let him marry Marie. Well, be careful what you wish for. After their son pushed them into a corner, the Tsar and Tsarina finally relented and let Alexander propose to the girl, who said yes. In a whirlwind, Marie went to live in Russia, converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and took on a new name, Maria Alexandrovna. After the initial rush, the family then waited a full year for her to become a safe childbearing age. And in that time, the scales already started to fall from Alexander's eyes. Alexander may have been in love at first sight with Maria, but the reality was much different. Although he was still devoted to her, it became clear that unlike him, his fiancée was quiet and conservative. And while their varying levels of energy sometimes helped balance them out, there were deeper issues with this. Within the first few months, Alexander must have realized how ill-suited Maria was to the bustling court life of Russia. Instead of energizing Maria, the atmosphere only exhausted and overwhelmed the reserved girl. It was the first hint of trouble in the union, but the two lovers still took it full speed ahead. When Alexander finally did decide it was time to marry Maria, he did it his way. He wed his teenage bride in a massive, showy ceremony that was more about his tastes than hers. To top it off, he chose the eve of his 23rd birthday as the wedding date. One thing was clear: the wedding night was an embarrassing success. However, just a year after her wedding, when she was still a teenager, Maria gave Alexander his first child. A daughter they named Alexandra, and with the birth of his daughter, a great charge overtook Alexander. Simply put, Alexander was a girl dad like no other. He was deeply involved in raising Alexandra, and as the girl grew into a toddler, he would often have her keep him company in his study while he worked. Indeed, although Maria soon birthed a succession of 3 strong male heirs, Alexandra remained his favorite, which only made the girl's fate all the more gut-wrenching. In 1849, when Alexandra was 6 years old, unimaginable tragedy struck the imperial family. That summer, the little princess perished from infant meningitis, sending both her parents into a tailspin. Tragically, as we'll see, this was only the first of Alexander's horrific losses. Now, Alexander was never shy about playing favorites with his children, and soon he went over the top. In 1853, Maria finally gave birth to another girl, Maria Alexandrovna, and the newborn immediately eclipsed the 6 siblings, all boys, who came before and after her. In 1855, Alexander's father, Tsar Alexander II, was 58 years old and getting somewhat long in the tooth, especially for the health standards in Russia at the time. So when he caught a chill in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg that ended up developing into pneumonia, everyone feared the worst. Well, they should have feared a lot more. The patriarch had never been one for sentimentality, but he really proved this over the next few days. When doctors informed Alexander's father that his pneumonia could be fatal, the old man refused any and all treatment. He was so adamant, some suggested that he wanted to die. Whatever the motive, the bitter end was the same. Nicholas passed on March 2, 1855, and Alexander's world got upended again. The 37-year-old Alexander was now the star of all Russia, yet a dark omen overshadowed his beginnings. At his and Maria's coronation ceremony in Moscow, the Empress's 4 ladies-in-waiting accidentally dropped her crown, where it fell into the folds of her cloak. Superstition held that this meant a bad future for Alexander and his wife, and the room grew uneasy. At the time of his coronation, the Tsar's great white hope was his eldest son and heir, Nicholas. And, seemingly for once in history, the heir was equal to his burden, well-educated, intelligent, and eloquent. Nicholas's uncle called him the crown of perfection, and everyone believed the future of Russia was in good hands. Fate, however, had much gruer plans. In 1863, Alexander began to put his heir on the market, and things came together almost too easily. The young Nicholas fell hopelessly in love with Dagmar of Denmark, and the pair became engaged. Then, the other shoe dropped. In 1865, Nicholas fell seriously ill. Alexander, his wife Maria, and his second son Sasha all rushed to the young man's side with Dagmar following. When they realized what was the matter, the Tsar's heart must have sunk. The universe had a bitter sense of humor when it came to Tsar Alexander II because his heir Nicholas was suffering from a fatal case of cerebrospinal meningitis, a variant of the illness that killed his little Alexandra all those years before. The Tsar had to watch as yet another of his bright, promising children faded in front of his eyes. On April 24th, the Tsar's heir died, leaving his son Sasha as the current heir. Though the tragedy of losing their eldest boy knocked Alexander and his wife off their feet, they had to save all of their remaining strength for Dagmar, who was totally beside herself. According to reports, the grieving Tsar and Serena had to tear the girl from their son's body. Tsar Alexander and Maria were apparently happy to let Dagmar lean on them because they had bigger plans for the girl. See, while sitting by the deathbed, the Romanov couple decided it was a great idea for Dagmar to get over Nicholas ASAP and marry their next son, Sasha, instead. And the plan actually worked. Alexander's replacement heir married Dagmar the next year. Unfortunately, this was one of the last times Alexander and his wife were truly unified. Since the birth of his last child, Alexander's marriage went through an unsettling transformation. Empress Maria, never a strong constitution, and never in love with the exuberances of the Russian court, grew more sickly and more reserved as the years went on. Eventually, the Tsar and Serena were miles apart in taste and temperament, and it began to show. To cope with the passing of his children and the chill of his marriage, Alexander dove further into balls and parties, and he would regularly transport hundreds of palm trees into the Winter Palace for eye-popping evenings. After all, what better way to forget your problems than basking in a tropic oasis? And of course, his retiring wife was almost never in attendance. It was all bound to a reach of breaking point, but no one could have predicted just how bad it would get. Throughout his married life, Alexander had always taken casual mistresses whenever it suited him. Although Empress Maria seemed dutifully silent on the matter of her husband's infidelities, there was a reason for this. The royal couple was concealing a darker truth in their own bedroom. Maria had grown so ill, her doctors eventually advised her to stop sleeping with the Tsar entirely. By the 1860s, with Empress Maria completely out of the bed, Alexander took his philandering to a disturbing pitch. In 1864, the middle-aged Tsar began meeting with a 16-year-old schoolgirl, Catherine, who he had known since she was 11. At first, he just visited her school to walk and talk, but that was only at first. As the months went on, Alexander became more infatuated with Catherine. The attractive girl had liberal opinions that matched his own, as well as a good way of expressing them. It was a combination he couldn't resist. Alexander's crush did not go unnoticed. Catherine's mother advised her to seal the deal with the Tsar as soon as possible. Instead, something much more dangerous happened. For all her 16 years, Catherine was no fool. She sensed that giving into Alexander's constant need for stimulation would only make her the latest mistress in a long line of them, which was not what she had planned for herself. Instead, Catherine calmed herself down, became Alexander's closest confidant, and waited for her moment. Unfortunately, that moment came with a high price. You see, after taking the throne, Alexander had abolished Russia's serfdom system, which made it so peasants were no longer bound to the land that they worked on. And while this was seemingly a no-brainer, it was a move that made him enemies in both conservative and revolutionary circles. This had dire results. On April 4, 1866, the Tsar was out walking when the radical agent, Dmitry Karkozov, tried to shoot him. Although it failed, the attempt thoroughly shocked Alexander, and he knew just who he wanted to comfort him. In the wake of the attempt on his life, Alexander didn't run to his wife's cold arms. Instead, he went right to little Catherine. Catherine was dealing with the passing of her own mother at the time as well, and the pair cried on each other's shoulders for weeks, growing closer than ever. Until July of 1866, when Catherine made her move, she finally allowed the Tsar to seduce her into his bed. The consequences were incalculable. After years of longing for and learning to understand Catherine, Alexander was now more in love with her than he had ever been with anyone, Empress Maria included. So, in the throes of passion, he made one treacherous promise. Alexander and Catherine kept very detailed notes about their relationship, which is how historians know exactly what they did the night they consummated their love. According to Catherine's records, Alexander looked her in the eye after the deed and told her, "Now you are my secret wife. I swear that if I am ever free, I will marry you." Well, it was no surprise when Catherine found herself pregnant in 1872. She gave birth to a son they named George, who was quickly followed up by a daughter, Olga, the next year. Yes, Alexander's midlife crisis was to get an entire secret second family. Alexander's children always were his weak spot, and his mistress Catherine knew just how to turn this to her advantage. In 1876, Catherine was pregnant again, and she made a daring request. Sick of living in the shadows, she insisted that she have the newest child in the Winter Palace, where the rest of Alexander's real family lived. She got what she wanted. Although the babe, a boy named Horace, died in infancy, he was nonetheless born in the emperor's rooms. Catherine was moving ever closer to the center of Alexander's life, and everyone was about to get one rude awakening. After giving Alexander another daughter in 1878 and helping him through a further 2 assassination attempts, Catherine completed her domination of the Tsar's heart. In fact, in early 1880, Alexander was so far gone that he decided Catherine was going to come live in the Winter Palace permanently. But this all came with a sinister price. You see, when Alexander decided to install Catherine in his wife's house, Empress Maria was dying. That's right, Maria's constant ill health was culminating in a vicious bout of tuberculosis. Within days, the backlash hit. Empress Maria might have been a bit of a downer, but she was still a fixture at court, and gossip circles worked overtime to tear down Catherine in support of their empress. Unfortunately, it was far too late. Knowing the end was near, Alexander's wife performed a selfless act. Not wanting to sow discord in the family when she was gone, Maria requested to meet Alexander's illegitimate children for the first time. Alexander complied, and with both the Tsar and Tsarina sobbing their eyes out, he brought his eldest, George and Olga, to her deathbed one evening. But by June 3, 1880, Empress Maria had passed away. Immediately following Maria's passing, Catherine let her true colors show. Not that she'd been too shy in the past. She was boldly delighted that the Tsarina was no more. As Alexander put it, she doesn't hide her joy. Indeed, the instant Maria's body started growing cold, Catherine began to push the Tsar into a move he could never come back from, barely a month after the Empress Maria passed. Alexander did a very stupid thing. He married Catherine, though a secret ceremony had nonetheless legitimized their children. Now the Tsar had anticipated a few rumblings about the union, but he soon discovered just how big of a scandal it was. Quite literally, no one in Alexander's support system was for the marriage. But this was just the beginning of his nightmare. As Alexander kept parading Catherine about as his wife, his family got more opportunities to turn their threats into action. At one ball, it came to an infamous head. That night, his daughter-in-law Dagmar refused to kiss the upstart Catherine, which was a huge snub for the time. Alexander was so embarrassed and upset, he later screamed at her, "You have no heart." In early March of 1881, Catherine woke up to an ice-cold prick of premonition. She was certain that today was the day Tsar Alexander was finally going to die after all the assassination attempts that had come before. Accordingly, she begged him to skip his duties and stay home, safe within the palace walls. Alexander's reply was typical and very naughty. Instead of taking Catherine seriously, Alexander did what he always did. He got down and dirty with her to calm her fears. Apparently, they did the deed right there on the table in her rooms, and then he walked off to do his usual Sunday military roll call, leaving the only slightly less worried Catherine behind. In mere hours, she would tragically be proven right. While outperforming his duties, Alexander's reality spun, then shattered. First, one radical threw a bomb at him, but it missed. Then another tried his hand. This second explosive, unlike the now 6 other attempts, finally hit its mark. Alexander knew it too. With the bomb landed right at his feet, he intoned, "It is too early to thank God." Suddenly, the atmosphere tore apart with shrapnel and shouts. When the chaos calmed, the emperor was saying his last words. As aides rushed to the Tsar's side, they discovered, half with horror and half with hope, that he was still alive and shouting for help by all rights. He shouldn't even have been breathing. His legs were shattered, and he was beyond all earthly help. Nonetheless, his loyal men carried the ruler back to the Winter Palace to perform last rites and to allow him to make a final heartbreaking goodbye. As attendants dragged Alexander's barely conscious form into his study, Catherine rushed out of her bedroom, half-dressed and near mad with grief. The image she created that day lived in infamy, still done up in her pink and white nightgown. The horrified watchers remembered how the Tsar's blood soaked through her finery as she held his body until the bitter end, and it sure was a bitter one. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factor Nate, for more incredible facts about everything.